All right. Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Michelle Raymond, and I am the director of Archer Gallery and Clark Art Talks here at Clark College. It is my pleasure today to host Casey Gray from San Francisco and to talk with us about his fantastic art practice. We are going to just get into a few things about our programming and then do some thank yous. And then I will introduce Casey, and then Casey will give his talk and lecture. Cool. So before we get into it, I wanted to just say a few things about Archer Gallery and Clark Art Talks programming. Archer Gallery currently has a stunning exhibition up in our physical gallery space on campus. It is called Wallowing, and it is a two-person show by Carissa Potter-Carlson and Kate Pruitt. They're both Bay Area artists as well. In fact, I think Casey might know Carissa. So there's a connection there, which is cool. And the show is up through May 13th, and it is, again, viewable in person in the physical gallery space in Vancouver, Washington on our campus. And we have regular gallery hours now, thanks to our fantastic gallery assistants. And so we're open Monday through Saturdays, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if you just want to pop by, you don't have to make an appointment or anything. You can just pop by, check out the space, and spend some time with some awesome art. And then our next exhibition, that'll be up through May 13th. And then our next exhibition and the last one of the academic year will be our Art Student Annual 2022 exhibition. And this is where we get to showcase the best of our Clark College art students and their work. And so we're in the process of figuring out all the dates and entries and submissions and all of that stuff. So if you're a student on the call right now, we would love for you to submit your work. We would love for you to apply. You can check Archer Gallery's website, archergallery.space, for information on that probably in the next week. Actually, everything will be finalized and figured out. Check your Clark email. I'll be sending out an email about that as well. And then always on our Instagram. So we update really regularly on our Instagram, which is just at Archer Gallery. So you can follow us on there, and this is for everyone. We update with all information related to our Clark Art Talks and all of our events related to Archer Gallery. So do follow us on there. Cool. So beyond that, we also do the Clark Art Talks. And so Casey's today is officially the first one of the spring term. And then we're going to have one more in a couple weeks. The next one is Mark T. Wise, who is a multimedia artist coming out of Salt Lake City. And he'll be joining us on Friday, May 20th, also at noon Pacific time. So join us back here again for that. There will be a different Zoom link, and then Zoom links again will be on our website. So check there for updates on that. All right, and so for some thank yous, as always, thank you to my fantastic art faculty. Thank you to Lisa Conway for always being here. You're the best. Thanks for the support. Ben, it's so nice to see you here too. All of our adjuncts are awesome. And then beyond that, I wanted to say thank you, of course, to our fantastic gallery assistants. Nanara is here today. Thank you for all of your help putting up our current exhibition. Thank you to Melissa and Cannon as well for helping out at the gallery. Y'all are amazing. And then I wanted to say thanks to all of our support staff, Ian Beckett, Shelley Williams, Madison Powell. You all have really helped a lot as well with all of our programming this year, last year. Forever, y'all are fantastic. So thank you so much. Of course, thank you to ASCC for funding and support as well. We couldn't do this without you. And yeah, I'd want to say thanks as well to our Clark community. Thank you to everyone for coming today. Thank you to our fantastic students. We do this all for you. So I hope that you enjoy these talks. All right, and with that, I'd like to introduce Casey, Casey Gray, our fantastic lecturer today. I first heard of Casey and his work almost a decade ago now, which seems kind of impossible. It's been that long, when I was living in San Francisco. He had gone to grad school at the San Francisco Art Institute and graduated the year before me or 2 years before me. We ran in the same circle of friends, but somehow never met in person, although everyone to this day still asks, how have you never met Casey? And I guess we're finally rectifying that today, which is super cool. I've kept up with Casey's work over the years. His paintings are vibrant, eye-catching collections of objects, symbolism, and metaphors. They tell stories of what I assume are snippets of Casey's personal experiences, thoughts, and environments, abstracted, distorted, rearranged, collaged, and reimagined through acrylic paint, stencils, spray paint, mediums, and more. His stylized hyperrealism sucks you in and will not let go. Textured and layered, they are perfect, clean gems, colorful, delicious candies that show both his meticulous and controlled nature, planted fast in the everyday, but also imagines itself of another more surreal existence, like that of Saturday morning cartoons or MTV's liquid television oozing off the screen into the living room. Casey received his MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute in 2010 and has exhibited extensively across the United States and abroad. His work hangs proudly in many public and private collections, including the deYoung Museum in San Francisco, Stanford University, the Microsoft Art Collection, and others. Casey is represented by Hashimoto Contemporary, where he recently had a solo exhibition titled Wild Animal in February of 2022. Please help me welcome outstanding painter, Casey Gray.
Woo. Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. I never thought of my work as candy before, but that's fun.
They're so delicious.
Yeah, I could see why you think that. I think so too. Thanks everyone for being here. Michelle, for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about my work and kind of my trajectory through the art world in the last 15 years. I probably have way too much to talk about, so I'm going to possibly go through things a little quickly, but if you want me to stop and go back to something, please just say so.
Feel free to use the chat, folks, too, and I can monitor.
Please feel free to ask questions. I always do better, answering questions than I do just talking about myself. So, I want to talk about what you want to hear, not just my own thoughts. So with that, I'm going to just get started and share my screen here. Can we all see this?
Yes.
Everybody is a yes, we're good?
Yep.
Okay. Then, here we go. I guess I'll start with just a little bit of a bio and kind of statement about my work overall. I'm primarily a still life painter, but that's not everything I do. I was born in San Jose, California, and I went to San Diego State for my undergrad. I was a painting major, and photography, and as she said, went to San Francisco Art Institute for my undergrad. But essentially, what I am interested in my work is what I like to say is my work examines the collective entanglement with the everyday. And what I really mean by that is I just use symbolism to talk about things I can't put into words. So I like to use objects and things like that to associations between objects to sort of form narratives and explore different ideas, specifically identity and my own experience. The slide here is just a photo of my studio. I'm going to move on to starting here with some early work. This is like 2005, 2010 is undergrad and graduate school, basically. And I have not looked at these images in a long time, or shared them. So consider this a little bit of a treat. This painting here is the very first painting I ever made that was exclusively spray paint and stencils. I think this is 2005. It's a 4-foot by 6-foot painting. And at this time, and kind of throughout my early 20s, my work was really crazy like this. And I was really interested in sort of the velocity of life, how fast everything felt at the time, how layered everything felt at the time. Yeah, I don't know. I guess this was like the first painting I made where I finally felt like I was finding a voice that was mine and my work didn't look like everybody else's. Prior to this, I had, and I'm going to just continue to move through some images that are around that time. Prior to this work, I had been trained traditionally in acrylics and oils, and I was painting kind of the same things as everybody else, you know, the still life painting in class, but I was really never satisfied around with that type of work. Didn't feel like me. I come from a background of skateboarding and counterculture, and that was really where my interest lied. So about halfway through my undergrad, I just decided to drop the brush altogether and commit to spray paint because that was what my interest was. And these are some of the works I was making around that time. They're very non-linear narratives of kind of, you know, I don't know, the partying, the atmosphere of living on the beach in San Diego, kind of finding myself as on my own. Really, it seemed like it was a really chaotic time in my life, and it was, you know, my work was reflecting that, I guess you can say. And moving on from that undergrad work, this is my studio at SFAI in 2008 when I started, and you can see there's stencils and everything.
Hey, Casey.
Yeah.
I have someone in the chat asked, did you create your own stencils for these earlier works?
Yeah, that's a good question. So everything I've done, I created myself, hand cut all the stencils out myself at this time. And 90% of it was from my own photography as well. I was actually a dual painting and photography major in college. So I was exploring kind of both those. I didn't really know what my career path was, but for some reason I was compelled to, I guess I was finding a way to stenciling and using my own images was a way to kind of meld both those worlds. So bringing my own photography into the painting. And then this is a photo of me, my offsite studio in my garage while I was in my first year of graduate school. And the reason why I started working there is because spray paint. There was no place to work in the graduate studios, so I ended up having to work at home. And that was actually a great thing for me. This painting here was called, what is it called? Hurts so much it stings, or feels so good it stings, I think. Feels so good it stings. And it was about a girl I was dating at the time, and every time we went out, like, men would swarm and hit on her, and just like, I don't even know really where it was. I guess this painting sort of represents like a move from the rather chaotic to like focusing on more of single action and thing, but and more of like a focused idea and a singular narrative rather than just an overall chaotic experience. At this time, I was really interested in street art techniques. I mean, I still am, but I never in my life was a graffiti artist or anything like that. I just drawn to the nature of spray paint for its flatness and speed and ability to mimic the digital platform, coming from like a background of drawing and early Photoshop and things like that on early Macintosh programs. And anyway, I was really happy with this painting at the time, and looking at it now, it's kind of crazy. From there, the work kind of moved on to layering the stencils a lot more, but focusing in more on real spaces. Again, just layering, and then the style of the works matching, again, like the speed and chaos and spontaneity of my life at the time. This painting is called Dolores Park, and it's obviously a pretty wild scene of thinking of the park as a circus, and just and surreal kind of place for social interaction. But every single element in this piece is an individual stencil, and then the whole thing is entirely spray paint. This is 4 feet tall by 7 feet wide, just to give you an idea of the scale. I'm not going to spend too much time on this early work. And so from there, as I moved through graduate school, sort of getting a little more focused, and you can see that this is sort of a pattern of a piece built up of all kinds of stencils. This is actually 8 feet tall by 16 feet wide, and it was one of my pieces from my thesis show. But what was really, that shift turned into from chaos to sort of organization, and trying to find a way to I guess just boil down my work into more comprehensible understanding for myself. And so I started really getting into symmetry, and trying to narrow down the objects and things I use into a little bit more specific and more thought out symbols. These are obviously kind of mandala pieces. You know, they're still dealing with a lot of different themes around, like being a young 20-something, and, you know, dating and heartbreak, and you know, kind of everything that goes around at that time, in at least my life. And then this is a piece, this is a 6 foot by 8 foot painting. That's sort of the culmination of my undergraduate work. I should say, like, during that time, I had already found representation at a gallery here in San Francisco after my first year in graduate school. So my whole second year of grad school was not just like developing the work, but it was also working towards my first major solo show. And this was like the crowning piece for that show, where it sort of started hitting really strongly on the symmetry thing, as well as just like decoration. And I was really trying to find my voice and my language with using stencils that wasn't just like the typical, you spray an image and this is what it is. Wasn't about like, it was and it was not about repetition, I guess. But anyway, moving on from there, this is a photo of me installing the first show. This is a photo of my my second home studio. Halfway through graduate school, during that, like around that same time, I had moved into a giant warehouse just a couple blocks away from school. And I say giant, it was like a 20,000 square foot warehouse that just happened to be the band Journey's old warehouse. So there was a full recording studio upstairs that my roommates, musicians used, and I painted downstairs. And it was kind of the best thing that ever happened to me and could have happened to my career at the time, because I had all of a sudden had like a 3,000 square foot studio for free. And here's me in the upstairs wood shop a few years later overlooking my studio. And then here's me kind of painting a little later, but you can just see the psychedelic energy from Journey and Jefferson Airplane and all these bands that recorded there, kind of finding their way into my work.
So cool, Casey. I had no idea. That connection is amazing.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy because it really kind of matched the energy of the work and my life and the, you know, the color palette I used and everything, it just really felt like there was this energy in that building. You know, it had so much history, and I was in there working, and then the musicians I was living with were also having like flourishing careers in the like electronic music space. And so there was thumping techno all the time and lots of beer. And
what was the space called?
we didn't really have a name for it. We just called it the Warehouse, or the
Warehouse.
Super Best Friends Club.
Cool. I love it.
Anyway, so that's just kind of a little bit of intro into my early work to kind of give you some context into what I'm doing now, and how I kind of got there. Here I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about my process, because it is unique. There was I guess I could say there's a paradigm shift at a point that I'd like to talk about. So my work is created almost entirely with spray paint, with aerosol paints, and hand cut masking techniques now. So around, after that first show, after grad school, I discovered what is called Frisket Film. And it's essentially like an adhesive tracing paper that you can use or to apply directly on to like a surface of a painting and, you know, cut through, rather than using paper stencils, which had been the crux of my process beforehand. And really what that meant for me was like a few things. It was like, one, I no longer had to rely on digital imagery, but also didn't have to, I could also draw everything out directly on my painting surface and cut it out by hand. So it became like this moment where I was like, oh shit, I have to learn how to paint all over again. This is like an entirely new process. And along with that, you know, it kind of forced a shift in what I was thinking about and what I wanted to make work about. You know, I had met the person that was soon to be my wife previously, and I had lost a lot of interest in the figurative and sort of work that dealt with my own experience and memory, and the chaos was sort of moving away, I guess you could say. And so my work started to get a lot more calm and focused around this time. But moving into this image here, so to talk about process a little more, sometimes I make drawings with just, you know, India ink, and they turn into paintings like this at the end. And sometimes I make fully realized digital sketches like the one on the left here, and the one on the right is the actual painting that came from that sketch. So almost a, you know, pretty true to the sketch painting. So just kind of talking about how I make things. So the discovery of the Frisket film has solved one major problem for me. And this is kind of how I found it in the first place, was that I wanted to make checkerboard type things. And the thing you can't do with paper stencils is make checkerboards, because all the pieces would just fall out as you cut them. And so that just became like an aha moment for me, like I said, where I had to teach myself how to paint all over again. And my aesthetic shifted radically to what we're looking at now, which is a few portrait style works. There are a couple portrait style works that really hybridized between a little bit of the paper stencil stuff still, but obviously like some of this more, I don't know, expressive looking drawing. Whereas I was exploring, you know, cutting everything and drawing it out directly on the surface. But this is really like what I would call my hybrid stage of both paper and Frisket-based cutting. these two works, both 5 feet tall, 4 feet wide, were featured in this show that we'll get to called Style of Eye, 2011 at White Walls Gallery. And the one on the left, I think, is called Growing Pains, and it's sort of reacting to like growing up, my work growing up, getting rid of certain ways of working and being out of in a new city. And the one on the right is called Sweep It Under the Rug. And it's kind of about like letting just old hangups and my history go and really embracing, you know, the future and my new way of working, letting the partying go, being a professional artist. This painting is also from that series called The Future is an Open Box. And again, it's a hybrid kind of painting with paper stencils and other sort of stuff, but the symbolism here about everything being tied up in knots, and everything being interconnected and sort of like the hanging up of the gloves sort of motif here. And I think this wig sort of thing here was about meeting my wife and just growing up. And then this painting here was based on my parents' garage and kind of all the memories I remember of that, not garage, backyard. Kind of putting them all into one painting. A lot of the subject matter I was dealing with at the time was around memory and trying to kind of just explore, you know, what was truth, like was memory, is memory, like, is the truth, is what actually happened the truth, or is like how you remember it the truth, and sort of like reforming past experience and processing past experience through these sort of narrative paintings. Here's some installation shots from that show, just to give you an idea. I had painted the floor in that show, which was really fun and gave the whole show a pretty chaotic sort of circus vibe, which I loved. Also with that show and with the discovery of the masking film came flowers. And this is really where I started getting into, my work started shifting to a focus on still life painting. And I was teaching myself how to paint again, essentially. It's sort of like, where do you start? And what became the most logical place to start for me was like painting 101, still life painting. Like the teacher would set up, you know, little tableau in the classroom where we'd all draw it. For me, that was more basing the work off historical references rather than actual still lives. And, you know, exploring that avenue, I guess. So the flowers have been my kind of longest running series here, where I continuing to explore different mark making. It's really, it's become now a place for experimentation in my work, where I can't really get into, do with all the more realistic still life painting. Over time, they've gotten much crazier, and they've also gotten more subdued. And I'm just gonna move through some of these here. I guess what I love, one thing I wanna say is that what I love about painting flowers, though, as possibly the most cliche and over painted subject matter of all time, is that you really kind of can't say anything with them beyond that. It becomes all about painting and kind of nothing else. And with, this is the latest piece I've actually done. I think I've done probably 45 or so flower paintings now over the years. And this is the most recent one, a monochromatic kind of two-chambered one that was really actually more of a response to COVID and everything than anything else, because it sort of mimics like some lungs here, and it's references Picasso's Blue Period and kind of the melancholy and everything that I was feeling stuck in the house at that time. But anyway, let's move on a little bit here. So classical still life painting. So like I said, the Frisket Film had me turning to still life painting as sort of like my most basic understanding of what art was as a kid, and always having an interest in that, and really just kind of, well, I should say one of my like philosophies towards painting, and I think the thing I tell young artists all the time is paint what you know. Authenticity, I think, is important in art, and being your most authentic self is the best way to approach your artwork, in my opinion. If not, you know, people will see right through that. So for me, like going to museums and stuff as a kid, I was always really interested in still life painting. I've always been more of a technocrat than a conceptualist, I guess you could say. So a lot of this early work is really, it's me learning to paint. It's me trying to mimic, you know, 16th, 17th century still life painting, and sort of exploring like what it means to make that kind of work in this day and age with spray paint and not, you know, traditional oil work. So after I'd started making the flower paintings, it was a natural progression to kind of move towards tabletop still life stuff. This painting's from 2011. This was the very first one I made. It's wild and still a hybrid sort of a hybrid of little patterning and traditional stencil work. And then this kind of stuff is all drawn out. Moving on from there, they got a little bit tighter. And I started making vertical ones that kind of mimicked the flower series, but with fruit and everything.
You see, how do you choose like your fruits and veggies and like different like the flora and fauna? I've always been like interested in like why certain, you know, like why bananas, or like why pineapple, or like why different types of leaves. Do you have like a method to like kind of deciding on that?
I mean, not really. It's like a lot of the themes that run through my work are kind of like tropical and leisure. I tend to focus on optimism as like a goal and a subject matter. And so like I choose things because they're brightly colored. It'll be fun to paint. In this early work, I wasn't really thinking too hard about it. It was more, you know, just about composition, like you know, giant papaya or whatever. A lot of these works, kind of all of the series that I've worked in simultaneously here are have started as an interest on like almost in like a single particular painting from art history that I loved, and so it kind of goes from there. But I'm going to keep moving forward here. So this painting's from 2013, a show that I did at White Walls. That was my gallery at the time, called Tropic, where I was really like doubling down on the tropical vibe, I guess you could say, and getting a little bit more formal with my compositions, and a little bit of a, wasn't so much of a hybrid of stencil techniques anymore, but more hybrid of like digital looking techniques with my, and like more analog looking stuff. Like I wanted to make sure there were elements in the work that, you know, let you know that it was spray paint, but also was very interested in blurring that line. And so this is like a, you know, person lying on the beach with their basket of fruit and frisbees and things. And here's a series of 3 smaller still life paintings that all take the same exact composition, but it was kind of playing with different subject matter as far as the food and things, elements go in it. And as you can see, things started to get a little bit calmer, more controlled, more focused. I got a lot better at painting. Yeah, I don't know.
They're so tasty, all of them. Like
Yeah,
the colors and like, yeah. Yeah,
it was kind of nice for me at the time to like not worry so much about conceptualism and like social issues and things like that, and really just focus on like making these kind of beautiful still life paintings that I felt for me at the time were, you know, it's like exploring this overlap of like digital and analog techniques and experience and stuff. This painting right here, this is from a show in 2014 in Dallas called Of Land and Sea, and which was really kind of maybe the best show I ever did of all this kind of still life painting. And this is the most recent one I've actually made. This one I made in 2020. To just give you kind of an idea of how it progressed over time. Not saying too much with the work about more than just like really technique with these. And here's some images from that show in Dallas at a gallery called Circuit 12 Contemporary that I worked with for a number of years. Which had a bunch of still life painting and other types of things in it. Some figurative work too that I'm not going to touch on. And so I'm going to move on here to like maybe my most, I don't know, the kind of favorite paintings I do, the curiosity cabinets and arrangement paintings that I do. I should say that I've never done shows that I can't make a painting show with 10 paintings that look the same. I've never focused on one body of work at a time. All of these series that I'm showing you and all of the sort of different things we're looking at, we're all ongoing simultaneously. So as we move through the different bodies, we're also moving chronologically through the development of each body, but I'm only making maybe 2 or 3 of each style of piece per year at this time. So in like I think this is 2012 or 2013, I was making some paintings like this where I'd kind of gotten rid of the whole gravity aspect of things and was really just like taking elements and arranging them in these kind of highly organized layouts. You know, for me, the kind of most overarching theme of my work about through these early years and even to now is the idea of the organization of experience as the definition of art. That's something a graduate school professor had told me long ago, and it really struck home. So these are the types of works that I'm making that really doubled down on that. And this was the very first cabinet still life I made, really just kind of like putting a lot of natural elements and things and trying to create a whole vibe and an identity for a non-existent person that might have collected these things. From here, they got a little bit, more complex. This one's called the Natural Predilection. and started working with different kind of ways to approach this idea. This one is like a mobile, and it had to deal with kind of the election of Trump and the hit for women's rights, and it's called Don't Weigh Me Down. You know, it was a lot of, this is where I'm starting to get into more addressing social issues and everything else that's going on in the world, and not just my own life. But I mean, for me, it's like the way I process my experience is through these types of compositions. You know, it's like they're not so sought out, I should say designed ahead of time. It's really like an aha moment when all these things finally come together into these compositions. So, and then here, this is a painting I made in, took about 2 years to make. It's 6 feet tall, 8 feet wide, called, what is it called? The Pursuit of Happiness. And really it was just about that. Literally, it's kind of putting in everything, stuff in here that made me happy. It was about making a painting that was gonna bring me joy, kind of putting everything that formed my identity at the time and my identity of the work into this piece. And really, I kind of see this piece as a self-portrait created between 2015 and 2017. There was a lot of time where I didn't work on it, but I would say it was about 5 actual months of full-on painting on it, 40 hours a week. And then from there, these types of works, I kind of just dropped all the like structure of the cabinets all together and just started turning them into window boxes. This piece is called Still Life Long After the Thrill, and the shoelaces in it create this reclining nude figure, but all sort of created out of you know, just traditional still life objects, started really getting into I don't know, just kind of addressing still some of the same themes from earlier work, leisure, longing, you know, but in a totally different way. This is one of my favorite paintings I've ever made. It's called Recipes for Survival 2020. Completed it right before the pandemic hit, and is like kind of just like everything you need to survive, you know, an oven mitt in case things get hot, like tires for good traction. There's a cactus with a rose carved into it for kind of everlasting love, like, you know, the fishing pole is sort of for like teach a man to fish. Cast iron pan, you know, a little bit of coffee, some watercolors. So kind of like, you know, this one right, this part right here, kind of alluding to like the, you know, weariness of technology. You know, don't get too caught up on Instagram.
You made that, Casey, sorry, you said that you made this like before the pandemic, right before?
Yeah, it was finished.
Prophetic.
I finished it like a month before the pandemic.
Wow.
hit, and just bizarre that I think like COVID was in the news, and
yeah,
I was maybe thinking about that in like an abstract way, like it was still in China as far as we knew. And
yeah.
And by the time I showed this piece in February of 2020, like, you know, the lockdown was like a month later. But
wow.
And then
we have about 5 minutes left too, just as an FYI.
Yeah, realizing that.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna just go through. From there, the work has gotten a little bit crazier. Still working with like this sort of cabinet still life idea, but moving it into different motifs. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit to kind of like trompe l'oeil work here, which is something I'm really interested in. On my honeymoon, I was in Copenhagen and discovered this artist called Cornelius Gilbrechts at the National Gallery there that is like just the most amazing trompe l'oeil painter I've ever seen. And it really got me like going down this rabbit hole of wanting to make works like that. So this is kind of like a self-portrait, just like, hi, my name's Casey Gray, and referencing kind of all different types of things from my work, from like Muni passes in San Francisco to other things. And this one's called Still Life with Netflix and Chill. When Netflix used to be a DVD type thing service, getting a little more formal with the work, moving through, started getting figurative with this idea of just using shoelaces to create figures. This one's called Trompe l'oeil with Mademoiselles, and it's like 4 female figures lying on the beach. And then in 2019, I did a show in Berlin at this small museum, and where I really doubled down on this idea and started making the trompe l'oeil work into more representational images again. So this is like a seagull floating on the water, and this one is like a rose created out of different objects. And
Casey, can you explain what trompe l'oeil is to the students?
Yeah, trompe l'oeil is essentially like painting, using the painting surface and painting in a way, it means trickery of the eye, basically. And so you're painting as if things are realistic, and literally like the surface, the painting surface is flat. It is not, we're not talking about deep space here. You're treating it as if you were looking at things in real life. This is maybe one of the favorite paintings I've ever made. It's trompe l'oeil with equine spirit, and it's like a t-shirt I had in the studio, and banana peels that have run through my, but it all creates a figure of like a horse. And here's some images from that show in Berlin of all this installed with some sculpture. Yeah, so that was not a great experience, that show, but I won't get into that. Concurrently, throughout all this time, I had started making these wavy works, and you can see them here in like sculptural form. But something I like to do when I'm stuck, when I have like what could be referred to as painter's block, is create limitations for myself in order to sort of narrow down the possibilities of what I could do. And so one day I created a simple wavy pattern, and that opened up an entirely new body of work for me that has since kind of diffused into everything I do. And this is the first thing I did with that pattern, was create a slice of pizza. It was, with these works, I'm taking, rather than doing these crazy still life arrangements where there's like 50 different symbols all kind of creating a narrative, it's really about doubling down on one symbol and one idea, and just trying to explore with like, almost in like an emoji context. So here's some food, and then this is the show in 2015 at Park Life that I ended up doing this whole installation of, where they were supposed to kind of read like Wheel of Fortune or something. Really thinking about communication and symbolism as communication, and emoji characters as communication, and maybe that being the language of the 21st century. It was just for scale. And then eventually I started turning them into sculptures. These are hand-carved wood forms that I created by routing out the negative space and adding some molding in for positive space, and sanding the shit out of them. And anyway, way too much work, but really happy with the results. This is a bonsai tree, maybe my favorite one that I've done. Then some installation of this work at Hashimoto Contemporary in 2020, right before the pandemic. And then moving on here, kind of the last thing. So after the pandemic hit and my son was born a month into that, I had an upcoming show, and I could not for the life of me bear the thought of making work about social issues and everything that had happened, from the election to the Black Lives Matter movement to the wildfires. Like, it was just too much, you know. I needed to make work that was like happy, that was fun. I had to take like an entire year off during that time to raise my son because childcare was not an option. And so I started painting animals, and they really were a chance for me to like explore different mark making techniques, different forms, different ways of drawing, and or something I'm still doing right now. This show was only a few months ago, but I'm having a ton of fun doing them. It is so nice to just paint for fun and for joy, for a change, rather than feeling kind of the pressure of the art world to do something more than that. Part of this was also, all of these works were actually taken, as far as their inspiration goes, from vintage magazine covers from like adventure pulps from the early 20th century. So like these really highly stylized illustrations that I'm sort of recontextualizing in my own way. And then this piece here, other pieces from that show, every single little instance of an animal on here was actually cut out from a vintage magazine cover and then recomposed into this still life here, where I, you know, an underwater scene. I kind of look at this painting as like a metaphor for COVID anxiety. There's like all these bubbles of who knows what, like floating around the air, and you know, all the animals are on like high alert, and it's this chaotic scene and nobody knows who to trust, and kind of like mimic the sentiment of like going outside with a newborn during COVID. So even though I'm, you know, making these crazy still life paintings, it still is very much like addressing what's going on in my own life. You know, getting back to what I was saying about paint what you know, because that is the best way for me to, you know, be authentic. And this is the same concept, just with like a more of a safari theme. So I think that's pretty much the end of what I've got here for images. I'd love to open this up for questions.
Yeah.
The show at Hashimoto that just closed at the end of February, with them all installed here. So
fantastic.
Yeah, I hope that wasn't too fast or too much for everybody. I would love to hear any questions if there are any.
Yeah, there are a few in the chat. So I'm just going to read a couple of those in the last few minutes that we have. But that was great, Casey. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Vivian asks, so to understand the process, you painted with acrylic paints onto the Frisket film and cut out each element to compose the painting?
No, well, yes and no. The Frisket film goes down first, just like tape, but it has a really light adhesive. So you can, the specific brand I use has a little bit of tooth, and you can draw on it with a pencil. So it's really just like putting down a piece of tracing paper and then kind of drawing out what I want, and then cutting that out directly on the surface. So it like scores the surface of the painting, and then painting within that void as I pull the pieces out. The paint isn't like directly, like the Frisket gets pulled up, it doesn't stay there forever. The paintings are just paint. If that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
It's kind of like adapted from like auto body airbrushing techniques and whatnot. The materials are really meant for like watercolor and airbrushing and stuff. And I use aerosol paints in my work, so I just adapted them that way, you know. it's like, even though I went to art school and I was a painting major in college and learned to paint pretty traditionally, like nobody taught me to paint. I still had to teach myself how to paint like this, you know?
Yeah, I love it. Somebody asked, do you use exclusively spray paint or find yourself coming back to a brush, or ever coming back to a brush? Do you find spray paint to be more arduous and less forgiving than oil or acrylic paint?
I never had the patience really for oil paint. I, dabbled, but it just was not really for me. I just always, like, for me, I always been interested in cutting things out. So spray paint was a way of speed to like get things to dry quickly. It went down flat. I was very interested. I'm still interested in kind of mimicking the flatness of digital screen, and spray paint is really like kind of the best way to do that, or airbrushing. But I still do paint certain elements with a brush. This little landscape is done with a brush here in like Bob Ross style, and this little tree is like done with a brush here, and like it's more what I do for details here than anything, like the little dirt on this tire. It's not, it's not a major element of the work, I should say. Here, like this little bonsai tree is made with a brush. So with that in mind, you can realize how painstakingly tedious everything I do is, but I sort of justified that by like the immediacy of the spray paint. It's like I spend a lot of time cutting things out and drawing things out, but then I'm rewarded with this like beautiful little, these instant gratification moments 100 different times in each painting, where I get to like spray something and pull it up, and there's like kind of everything is a reveal, so I really love that kind of contrasting element of my process,
Each element is so precious.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's not, because there's another one right next to it, or
right,
kind of just cover it or take it out.
Yeah, awesome. So one more question, maybe we'll try to do two. Joel asked, what about exploring your layers in digital 3D space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to go back to like this very beginning slide here. My process, I do make really layered really layered digital sketches at times, like this here. Each element in this is its own layer. And like, it takes a while for these to come together sometimes in digital space, but I spend way too much time on like a Google image search, just going through like stock images, and I have like an internal image bank that I create from saved images, and we'll pull from all of that to layer out these sketches, and then kind of that will dictate kind of like the layering process within the actual paintings too. I'll obviously start with whatever is. It's not really that different from any other standard process. Like if you're going to start with the sky in a landscape painting, you start with the background and move up. You know what I mean? And then at the end, I will add drop shadows and things like that to like bring out more depth. But the really early work that like this kind of stuff, there's just like so many different layers of stuff, just all building on top of each other. And these were like I said, hybridized between the overall compositions being digitally sketched first, and then just working within these like spaces, like interior spaces I had created for myself. Like this painting just started as chairs in this weird triangle. So
awesome. I think one last question. Have you ever considered transparent paints on glass?
No, I have not really considered that as a realistic thing for me. I have dabbled. Painting on glass is hard because you have to paint backwards. If you paint from the back, at least. I would love to do some like stained glass type thing, but I don't think painting on glass is necessarily the right way to do that, you know. The things I'm most interested in moving forward with now are really just kind of larger, better still life stuff. That's my doorbell.
I know. I think that might be the alarm for the end of the talk as well. But thank you so much, Casey. There's some really great comments in the chat too, from folks just saying, you know, how much they love your work. So if you want to check that out, you know, feel free to do that. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have the opportunity to do this. I could have gone on for another hour in more depth, but
yeah. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, of course, to Casey for being here, and thanks to our students for coming and all of your great comments. You know, remember to check us out on archergallery.space. And this talk, like all of our talks in the past and into the future, are recorded. And so if you want to share it, if you want to refresh, they are on our website. And we have a YouTube channel too. Archer Gallery has a YouTube channel, so you can check us out on there too. But thank you again. Make sure to check out Archer Gallery in person at Clark College if you are in the area, and see our fantastic current show and our future shows that are coming up. All of our programming, again, listed on our Instagram, listed on our website. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks so much for talking with us today, Casey. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.